There's a moment in football when the scoreboard tells one story and everything happening around it tells a completely different one. Argentina 3, Algeria 0. On paper, clean, decisive. A statement from the defending world champions in their first match of the 2026 World Cup on American soil. Lionel Messi, 38 years old, scoring a hat trick in Kansas City and tying Miroslav Klose's all-time World Cup scoring record of 16 goals in a single extraordinary night. It should have been the feel-good story of the tournament's opening week. The greatest player of his generation, producing one final towering performance on the world's biggest stage in what is almost certainly his last World Cup. A narrative Hollywood itself couldn't have scripted better. But 3 days later, something happened that turned that clean 3-0 scoreline into one of the most contentious institutional disputes this tournament has produced so far. The Algerian Football Federation didn't hold a press conference. They didn't fire off an emotional post on social media, venting frustration after a difficult result. They sent a formal written complaint directly to FIFA's headquarters in Zurich, Switzerland, addressed to the refereeing commission, naming specific incidents, naming specific players, naming specific officials, and formally asking football's governing body to explain how the laws of the game were applied that night in Kansas City, or, in Algeria's view, why they weren't. This is not standard behavior after a 3-0 defeat. This is something much more serious. And to understand why it matters as much as it does, you have to look at the details of what Algeria is actually alleging, the broader pattern of officiating controversies that have already defined the opening days of this tournament, the political environment surrounding FIFA itself heading into this event, and what history tells us about what formal federation complaints actually tend to achieve once FIFA receives them. Let's start with what the complaint says because the specifics matter enormously here, and they go significantly beyond the single moment that dominated the headlines immediately after the final whistle. According to Algerian outlets TSA and Competition, citing official federation sources, and subsequently confirmed by AFP and Reuters, the protest formally identifies multiple incidents, all involving Argentina players, all allegedly left without proper disciplinary action by referee Simon Marciniak, and the VAR team, led by his fellow Polish official Tomasz Kwiatkowski, based in the tournament's review center. The first incident, and the one that immediately exploded across social media and sports broadcasts worldwide, happened in the 32nd minute of the first half. Messi's studs made contact with Algerian captain Asa Mandi, raking down from the knee toward the calf with a raised boot from behind. Mandi went to the ground. He required treatment on the pitch. Marciniak blew his whistle for the foul, but did not produce a card of any color. He did not pause play for a formal pitchside VAR review at the monitor. The VAR team examined footage from multiple angles and ultimately transmitted no recommendation for a review, finding what FIFA protocol describes as no clear and obvious error in the on-field decision. Play continued. Algeria attacked. Messi stayed on the pitch and went on to complete his historic hat trick. The Algerian Federation's position, laid out formally in their written complaint, is that this was a red card offense under the laws of the game as written. A dangerous tackle from behind with a raised boot making contact with an opponent's leg constitutes serious foul play under FIFA's disciplinary guidelines, and serious foul play carries an automatic dismissal. The Federation argues that the VAR technology specifically exists to correct exactly this type of decisive match-altering error, and that its failure to act here represents a fundamental breakdown of the system's core purpose. Here is where an independent expert voice matters. A senior referee analyst speaking to multiple broadcast outlets after the match said plainly that while the incident likely didn't clear the bar for an obvious red card under the strict VAR intervention protocols as they are currently written, it was unquestionably a missed yellow card. Quote, "Considering all these factors, a yellow card would have been the most appropriate decision. It does not meet the criteria for an obvious red card, and that is why VAR chose not to intervene. But it is 100% a missed yellow card." End quote. That statement tells you something important right there. Even the officials closest to the process are acknowledging that the disciplinary response on the night was insufficient. The debate is not about whether Marciniak got everything right. The debate is about how far wrong he got it. The second incident has received considerably less public attention than the Messi challenge, but Algeria's complaint may actually be regarded as equally serious from a legal standpoint under the laws of the game. According to multiple sources confirming the federation's formal protest, Liverpool and Argentina midfielder Alexis Mac Allister struck 18-year-old Algerian forward Ibrahim Maza with what the federation describes as a deliberate elbow to the face in the 74th minute of the match. The incident occurred while play was moving elsewhere. Mac Allister caught Maza directly in the face with a high trailing arm as Maza attempted to drive through the Argentine press in the central third. The young Algerian collapsed immediately, clutching his head. He was cleared to continue temporarily, but was ultimately substituted off in the 81st minute. Marciniak was reportedly within a meter of the incident when it occurred. No foul was given, no review was conducted, no card was shown. Mac Allister walked away without any disciplinary action whatsoever. Now, put those two incidents together, and what Algeria's argument becomes is not simply an emotional reaction to losing a football match. It becomes a structured, formal, legally specific case that says the following. Had both of these situations been correctly assessed under the existing laws of the game, Argentina could have been reduced to 9 men for a significant portion of the first half and through the final quarter of the match. A team missing 2 of its most influential players, including arguably the most commercially valuable individual player on earth, for periods of an already tense and contested match changes the entire tactical and physical balance of what follows. The final scoreline of 3-0 may not have been the score that a fully intact Argentina played out against a fully intact Algeria under those circumstances. Algeria's federation is not simply saying they were unlucky. They are formally arguing and writing to the body, responsible for overseeing and appointing those officials, that the official record of their match may have been shaped in part by decisions that didn't follow the rules as they are written. Now, here is where the context becomes absolutely essential to understanding why this complaint carries the weight it does. Because this is not the first time Algeria's federation has taken exactly this institutional path when they felt wronged at the highest levels of the game. In 2022, after Algeria were eliminated from World Cup qualification by Cameroon on the away goals rule in the dying seconds of extra time, the federation lodged a formal appeal with FIFA. They described the officiating that night as scandalous and demanded the match be replayed entirely. FIFA reviewed the appeal and ultimately did not grant it. Algeria did not go to Qatar. The heartbreak of that elimination and the federation's very public institutional fight against it became a defining chapter in the team's recent history. Then, earlier this year, during the Africa Cup of Nations, Algeria were eliminated from the quarterfinals against Nigeria. The federation went through the same formal process again, filing complaints with both the Confederation of African Football and FIFA directly. This time, the complaint arrived alongside genuinely disturbing scenes on the pitch itself. The match referee required a physical police escort to leave the field, as confrontations involving Algerian staff members escalated around him. The Algerian Federation was subsequently fined $100,000 by CAF for the conduct of players, staff, and supporters that day, including supporters who reportedly waved banknotes in the direction of match officials in what was widely interpreted as a gesture accusing the referee of corruption. Algeria's appeal against those sanctions was still formally pending when this World Cup kicked off. That pattern of behavior matters because it tells you something critical about the institution now making this latest complaint. Algeria's federation has formally challenged officiating decisions across 3 major tournaments in under 4 years: a World Cup qualifying playoff in 2022, a Continental Championship earlier this year, and now a World Cup group stage match in 2026. Whatever your view of the individual merits of any single complaint, the consistency and the institutional persistence of this pattern suggests an organization that genuinely believes it faces a recurring structural problem at the sport's biggest stages, not an administration simply looking for someone to blame after one bad night. And here is where the story gets significantly larger than Algeria versus Argentina, because the Algerian Federation's complaint does not exist in isolation from everything else happening around officiating at this specific tournament. It is, in fact, the third major VAR controversy of the entire opening week, and they are piling up in ways that are beginning to form a pattern of their own. The first erupted during the Switzerland against Qatar match, which ended 1-1 in the San Francisco Bay Area. A penalty was awarded to Switzerland and upheld following a VAR offside review. The decisive visual evidence behind that review, the specific offside animation lines that confirmed the decision, was never made publicly available to the watching world. FIFA later issued a statement acknowledging a brief technical outage had prevented the onside animation graphic from being generated. They insisted the VAR workflow was not affected and that the decision followed normal procedure. But pundits, including Gary Neville, said directly on air that the call appeared wrong to his eyes, and that FIFA owed the global audience far clearer visual evidence to justify it. Ian Wright described the lack of transparency around the decision as scandalous and said, "The governing body appeared to simply be doing what it wanted, regardless of the scrutiny pointed at it." The second controversy was the Messi incident itself, debated extensively by broadcasters and former professionals across multiple platforms before Algeria's federation had even filed anything formally. Former Manchester City Academy product Nedum Onuoha, watching the same replays available to every viewer at home, said on air that the challenge should have been a red card, and that the decision fed directly into a broader narrative that the sport's biggest individual stars receive a different and more lenient standard of treatment than everyone else on the pitch at the same level of competition. Thierry Henry, working as a pundit for the tournament's broadcast coverage, acknowledged openly that many people genuinely believed Messi deserved to be sent off that night in what is technically part of his World Cup farewell campaign at the age of 38. And there was a third incident entirely separate from the Messi and Mac Allister situations that added its own disturbing layer to the tournament's opening week. During Germany's match against Curaçao in Houston, referee Sean Evans was accused by anti-discrimination campaigners of making a hand gesture associated with white supremacist groups while the television broadcast cut to the VAR room. The allegations immediately triggered calls for FIFA to remove Evans from the officiating panel. FIFA's disciplinary committee subsequently cleared him, but the episode itself added to a growing atmosphere of institutional suspicion around the entire refereeing operation at this tournament. That is the environment into which Algeria's formal complaint has now landed, not as an isolated grievance from a single team that simply lost a football match, but as the most institutionally serious and formally documented expression yet of a pattern that television pundits, respected decorated former players, and now a full National Football Federation have all independently and publicly identified across the tournament's very first week. None of this exists in a political vacuum either, and this is where the story becomes bigger still. FIFA's relationship with political power has never been more complicated or more visible than it is at this particular tournament. Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president who has held the position since 2016 and who essentially rebuilt FIFA from the ruins of the Blatter-era corruption scandals, has been present throughout the build-up to this event in ways that have drawn enormous scrutiny of their own. On the eve of the tournament, Infantino publicly urged football fans to, quote, chill and relax in response to FIFA's critics, even as the governing body faced questions from the United Nations about immigration enforcement policies in the host nation that threatened to prevent fans from some countries from safely attending matches. The New Yorker published a lengthy profile of Infantino in June of this year, describing him as a man who has remade global football in his own image. A former senior FIFA official quoted in that piece stated, and these are the reported words, "It is fair to say that no significant decision at this tournament is made without Gianni's direct input." That is a significant claim from someone who has worked inside the organization. And while it should be heard as one source's characterization, rather than a proven operational fact, it speaks directly to the concentration of authority at the top of football's governing body at the exact moment when questions about officiating transparency and institutional consistency are dominating the conversation about this World Cup. Infantino's relationship with current U.S. President Donald Trump has been widely reported and has become its own source of political friction surrounding the tournament. Prior to the event, a coalition of more than 90 civil society and human rights organizations sent a formal letter to Infantino urging him to use his reported personal proximity to the Trump administration to protect the safety and rights of foreign supporters traveling to the United States for the tournament, specifically in the context of aggressive immigration enforcement operations being conducted in the host cities. Iran's Football Federation President Mehdi Taj went further, telling reporters that it was, quote, purely a political position, and that FIFA must tell them to desist from this behavior, referring to U.S. immigration authorities. What this means in practice for the Algeria complaint is the following. The complaint is being processed by an institution whose internal governance, independence, and relationship with political and commercial power are all simultaneously under scrutiny from multiple directions at the highest levels of global public debate. FIFA reviewing an Algerian complaint about how its officials treated matches involving one of football's most commercially valuable nations, with one of the sport's most globally marketed individual stars at its center, is not a neutral administrative process conducted in a vacuum. It is a process happening inside a specific institutional culture, at a specific political moment, involving specific commercial interests that are very much part of the story. Messi himself has said publicly and repeatedly that this World Cup is his last. Every match he plays carries the weight of farewell. Every moment he produces on the field is treated by the global broadcast machines surrounding this tournament as a potential final memory of the greatest player the sport has ever seen. The commercial value of that narrative, to FIFA, to broadcasters, to sponsors, and to the global sports media ecosystem built around this event, is incalculable. None of that automatically implies anything corrupt or predetermined about how officials are instructed to operate, but pretending that context doesn't exist when analyzing how a controversial call involving Messi was reviewed and ultimately left unchanged would be willfully naive. Former players have said it plainly. The commercial weight around certain players does influence how officials process moments under pressure. Whether that influence is conscious or unconscious, formal or simply cultural, it operates in the background of every major officiating decision at every tournament of this scale. Now think about what this means for the actual people caught directly in the middle of all of this. Ibrahim Maza is 20 years old. Correction. He was described in multiple early reports as 18 and subsequently in others as 20, reflecting the rapid reporting around a new breakout talent. He was playing in his first World Cup match against the reigning defending champions. On the same night, the man across the field from him was making history. Whatever precisely happened in that moment with Mac Allister's elbow, his own national federation believes he was struck in the face while play continued around him, and that the officials responsible for protecting him under the laws of the game missed it entirely. That is not a tactical grievance about a scoreline. That is a young player's introduction to the World Cup stage and his country's football establishment, standing up in writing to say that moment deserved considerably more protection than it ultimately received. Asa Mandi is Algeria's captain and one of the most experienced players in their squad. He went to the ground. He required treatment. His own manager watched the replay in the dugout and knew what had happened. The entire Algerian bench erupted toward the referee demanding a card. The entire crowd inside the stadium heard those appeals, and none of it changed the outcome. For Algerian supporters who have followed this team through one heartbreaking elimination after another over the past several years, this latest match and this latest complaint will read as entirely consistent with everything they have already witnessed. Cameroon in 2022, Nigeria earlier this year, and now Kansas City. A pattern of genuinely believing that the biggest moments against the biggest and most commercially significant opponents are not officiated with the same rigor and transparency applied to matches played lower down the football pyramid, away from the brightest lights and the largest global broadcast audiences. The broader question this all raises for the tournament going forward is whether VAR, as it currently operates at this World Cup, can actually deliver on its core promise. The system was introduced specifically to eliminate the kind of decisive match-altering errors that change outcomes and corrupt the integrity of results. It was meant to be the answer to every complaint that came before it about human error at crucial moments. What Algeria's case, alongside the Switzerland-Qatar penalty controversy and the series of other officiating debates across the opening week, is beginning to suggest is that VAR in 2026 is not delivering neutral consistency. It is delivering selective intervention. Penalty decisions that affect host-adjacent nations get reversed through complex reviews that the public never fully sees explained. Physical challenges involving the world's most famous player get assessed against a bar defined so narrowly that even the experts analyzing the process acknowledge the resulting decision was wrong on the yellow card standard, just perhaps not wrong enough on the specific red card threshold to trigger the mechanism built precisely to correct it. If that sounds like a system designed to produce convenient outcomes rather than correct ones, it is worth being clear that nobody has proven that allegation. But it is no longer just frustrated players and partisan fans raising the concern. It is now decorated former professionals, senior media figures, and an entire national football federation, formally and on the permanent institutional record. What happens next is genuinely uncertain. FIFA will process Algeria's complaint through its standard internal, disciplinary, and refereeing assessment procedures, as it does with all formal complaints submitted by member federations. Simon Marciniak and Tomasz Kwiatkowski and the entire VAR team from that match in Kansas City may face an internal performance review examining their decisions that night, separate entirely from any public statement the governing body chooses to issue. Historically, post-match complaints of this type, even when accompanied by specific time-stamped video evidence and formally submitted through every proper institutional channel, have rarely resulted in overturned results or retrospective player sanctions once an official match outcome is entered into the records. Algeria's 2022 appeal against Cameroon ultimately changed nothing about that elimination. Their complaint against Nigeria earlier this year remains pending with no resolution that has altered their path out of the tournament. The most realistic outcome of this latest complaint is not a replayed match or a reversed scoreline. It is at most an internal review that may affect future officiating appointments for Marciniak and his team, alongside some form of formal acknowledgement or denial from FIFA's refereeing committee. But that does not make the complaint meaningless or without consequence. Algeria's federation has used the only formal institutional tool available to a nation that believes it has been wronged on the sport's biggest stage. The complaint is now on the permanent official record. It is part of the documented history of this tournament. It adds Algeria's voice, formally and in writing, to a chorus that by the end of this opening week includes respected broadcast analysts, widely decorated former players, human rights organizations, and now an entire national governing body, all independently raising the same fundamental question from different angles and through different means. The question is whether football's governing body is willing to hear it, because FIFA's silence in the immediate days following these complaints has been notable and deliberate. No detailed public explanation of the VAR reasoning on the Messi challenge. No transparency about the internal review process for the Switzerland-Qatar penalty. No statement addressing the fundamental concerns about officiating consistency that have accumulated across the tournament's opening week with a speed that nobody who has watched major tournaments could describe as normal. Gianni Infantino told fans to chill and relax before this tournament began. But when three separate major VAR controversies arrive in the first week of a tournament co-hosted by the United States and played before the largest combined broadcast audience in the history of the sport, chilling and relaxing stops being a reasonable institutional response and starts looking like something closer to evasion. The knockout rounds haven't begun yet. The pressure on officials, the stakes attached to every decision, and the global scrutiny of every replay will only intensify from this point forward. And every unresolved question from this opening week will be waiting in the background when the next controversy arrives, which at the rate this tournament is moving feels less like a possibility and more like a matter of time. Algeria play their next match in this group knowing the score reads 3-0 against them, and knowing their formal complaint is sitting in FIFA's inbox with no confirmed response. Their World Cup is not over. But the story around their first match is now permanently embedded in the broader narrative of this tournament, not just as a night when Messi made history, but as the moment when the cracks in how this World Cup is being officiated became impossible to ignore.